Hey all, this is Redditosker. With Tears of the Kingdom's release date fast approaching, there is sure to be an influx of people that are new to the Zelda series. Tears of the Kingdom is probably going to be the biggest Nintendo title that they release this year, and as the date approaches, as marketing increases, and as reviews for the game start coming out, I expect more and more newcomers will begin to take notice. And this situation meshes quite well with my channel specifically. My channel has a big history with the Monster Hunter and Elden Ring fan bases, and there's a lot of those people that have followed me into Zelda content, even though their experience with Zelda games is minimal. So the purpose of this video is to answer a lot of the questions people may have going into Tears of the Kingdom. We are not going to cover the entire backstory of every game. Instead, we're going to cover specifically the things that I think are important to understanding the series in general, and Tears of the Kingdom specifically. Things like, what is the game's mythos? What's going on with the separate timelines? And why do many of the games have a reoccurring cast? These topics weren't really covered much in Breath of the Wild, but they could be important for Tears of the Kingdom, especially since Ganondorf, the series antagonist, has made his return. Alright, first of all, the Zelda series happens as a cycle over a long period of time. Many of those games have incarnations of Link, Zelda, and Ganon as reoccurring characters. So the question is, how are they reincarnating, and why? The answer is that they're not, really. At least not all of them. Every incarnation of Zelda, for example, is a different person. What they share is a lineage. They're all related by blood, and they're all descended from the first Zelda. The first Zelda is important because she's the mortal incarnation of the goddess Hylia. We'll talk about the goddess in a moment, but what's important here is that Hylia is the goddess. When people refer to the goddess, they're talking about Hylia, and her statues are shown across Breath of the Wild. The descendants of her mortal incarnation would go on to establish the Kingdom of Hyrule, their bloodline becoming the long-lasting royal family of Hyrule. And the reason why in every game there is a Princess Zelda is because there is a tradition for women born into the royal bloodline to be named Zelda, after her mortal embodiment. The Zeldas share what is known as the blood of the goddess, which gives them access to divine power, most notably the power of prophecy and the power to seal. Though everyone in the royal family is a descendant of the goddess, it seems only women have access to her power. In Breath of the Wild, when Zelda's mother passed away unexpectedly, Zelda was the only person left with the ability to seal, and so had been trying since the age of 7 to unlock her powers. So, Zeldas do not reincarnate. It's possible that Hylia incarnates into every Zelda, but the Zeldas themselves are their own individuals. Their names and their divine powers are merely their birthright. Now, Links, on the other hand, do reincarnate. Each Link has what is called the spirit of the hero. They do not have to be connected by blood or connected in any way at all. They don't share memories, but they do seem to be an incarnation of the same person. Which brings us finally to Ganondorf. Ganondorf is a little harder to explain. First, we need to talk about what connects all three of them throughout the ages, and that would be Hylia and Demise. In a way, Demise is the forever antagonist of the series. He is described as an eternal being, the conqueror of time, the source of all monsters. According to tales passed down through the generations, he appears differently in each epoch and to each person who lays eyes on him. Demise seems to be a primordial force of nature. He's more like the personification of the concept of hatred than a normal villain. He's the central antagonist in Skyward Sword, and is defeated at the end of the game. After his defeat, this is what he says: "This is not the end. My hate never perishes. It is born anew in a cycle with no end. I will rise again. Those like you, those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero, they are eternally bound to this curse. An incarnation of my hatred shall ever follow your kind, dooming them to wander a blood-soaked sea of darkness for all time." Demise cannot be permanently sealed away, nor can he be permanently killed. His is a malice that returns again and again in a new form. And this is what binds Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf together. Ganondorf is an incarnation of Demise's hatred. So, finally, we can talk about Ganondorf himself. Because while a incarnation of Demise's hatred will be born into every age. Ganondorf is still just a person, and he does not reincarnate. And so in every game that he's appeared, Ganondorf is the same guy. Not an incarnation of a different guy, the same person. At this point I realize I've gone too long without explaining the Triforce. So I guess let's do that now. There are 3 golden goddesses that stand above Hylia as chief deities. They are the old gods that created the world. Din, the goddess of power, created matter. Nehru, the goddess of wisdom, created the laws of physics. And Ferrare, the goddess of courage, created life. At this point we need to take a pause because I can already hear people complaining about my pronunciation of Ferrare. I am not calling Ferrare Ferror. In Japanese, they pronounce her name using 3 syllables, and if it's good enough for the Japanese, it's good enough for me. So for the duration of your time on my channel, Ferrare it's gonna be. Anyway, back to the video. The 3 goddesses, their tasks completed, ascended into the heavens, but left behind a sacred relic, the Triforce, consisting of 3 golden triangular pieces, and each associated with one of the goddesses. It is the most powerful thing in this world, having the ability to grant any wish, and its acquisition is the source of pretty much all conflict throughout the games. So, with that out of the way, let's go back to talking about Ganondorf. Ganondorf's first appearance is in Ocarina of Time. He is king of the Gerudos, and his goal is to acquire the Triforce and rule the world. Over the events of the game, Ganondorf, Link, and Zelda possess the Triforces of power, courage, and wisdom, respectively. The Triforce of power proves to be more than enough for Ganondorf to conquer Hyrule. Unable to face him in his child body, Link is sent forward in time to face him as an adult. The final battle ensues, Link and Zelda are victorious, and Ganondorf is sealed away. And here is where the timeline shenanigans begin. After they seal Ganondorf away, Zelda sends Link back in time to a point before Ganondorf acquired his piece of the Triforce. Link re-meets young Zelda, reveals Ganondorf's treachery to the royal family, and Ganondorf is captured before he has the opportunity to cause any harm. Now, the reason that there's separate timelines is because the timeline in which Zelda sent Link back into the past still exists. It continues forward without Link, eventually becoming the world shown in Wind Waker. And the second timeline in which Link returns to the past also continues, eventually becoming the world that became Twilight Princess. This is how Ganondorf is present in both games. In Twilight Princess he is sentenced to be executed, but it turned out that he still has the Triforce of power, even though in this timeline he never acquired it, implying perhaps that the Triforce doesn't care about the timelines, and if a Ganondorf gets it in any timeline, they all have it. At the end of both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, Ganondorf is killed. Now, finally, it's probably important to mention the difference between Ganondorf and Ganon. When the game says Ganondorf, it's talking about this human. Ganon is the pig-like form Ganondorf turned into at the end of Ocarina of Time through the power of the Triforce. And Ganon has always been used to refer to the pig form of Ganondorf in all future games. Finally, for full disclosure, there is actually a third timeline, according to Nintendo. I try and ignore this timeline because I find it so stupid that it's hard to talk about it without getting animated. Basically, at the end of Ocarina of Time, there is a version of events in which Ganondorf wins. He defeats Link at the end of Ocarina, and this creates another timeline in which a lot of the older 2D games happen. Now, I love all of the 2D games as well. This isn't about the 2D games. They're victims in all this. I'll have to make a full video talking about the third timeline and why its existence offends me. But for the purposes of this video, the only important element is that the third timeline exists. Now, let's talk about Breath of the Wild. It's never stated in which timeline Breath of the Wild exists. What is made clear is that Breath of the Wild exists at the very end. It exists so far into the future that the other games are considered to be in the era of myth. The most popular Breath of the Wild timeline theory is that Nintendo wants it to be the endpoint for all timelines. That Breath of the Wild occurs in a future so distant that all the timelines have converged somehow, and you'll end up in the same point. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense, but I actually do think that's the most likely explanation. Breath of the Wild contains references to pretty much all the timelines. In Zelda's ancient ceremonial blessing, she mentions skyward bound, adrift in time, or steeped in the glowing embers of twilight, which are obvious references to Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, and Twilight Princess. So that connects them pretty definitively to the Twilight Princess timeline. However, connecting them to the Wind Waker timeline is the fact that the Rito are present. The Rito being a race that exclusively existed only in Wind Waker. According to the Hyrule Encyclopedia, the Rito evolved from Sora, because they couldn't live in the unnatural water that made up the Great Sea. So the presence of both Zora and Rito co-evolved races further reinforces the idea that these timelines are all one thing now. Also referencing Wind Waker is the rock salt item. Its description reads, crystallized salt from the ancient sea commonly used to season meals. Rock salt can be found by destroying ore deposits all across Hyrule. And if the rock salt came from the ancient sea, then that implies pretty much everywhere in Hyrule used to be underwater. Plus, I don't think that Nintendo cares very much about the timeline. They care that the events in the timeline happened. They care about their history. But I don't think they care very much about what goes where. There's several interviews with Eiji Aonuma where he pretty much says that they don't really think about the timeline when they're making these games. They don't like feeling restricted about where it's going to go. Pretty much confirming that the order of events is of secondary concern if it's of concern at all. There are also interviews where he has stated that a restricted timeline would eliminate the room for imagination, which wouldn't be fun, and so they want to avoid making clarifications. So personally, I do think that they care that Breath of the Wild happens after the events of all their previous games. They do care about the history they've built, but they don't care about the minutiae of that history. They don't care what timeline it goes in. So referencing all timelines in Breath of the Wild effectively puts the game at the end of everything, which I think is their deliberate intent. Alright, I think that's everything. Hopefully this video was a useful primer to the important bits of Zelda lore and history. I recommend going down to the comments and giving them a read, because if I've missed anything important, I'm sure there'll be people to let me know. That's the end of this video, and as always, thank you very much for watching.